You guys know that scene from, I think it's like Beauty and the Beast, where what was her name? Belle. Belle is on the other side of the table, like a long way away on this like ridiculously large table from the Beast on the other side. That's actually a very similar location to where we record this podcast. I'm just sitting alone right now at a very long wooden table in an extravagant dining room, and nobody's on the other side right now. I actually decide all guests on this podcast arbitrarily based upon who walks in the room, but yeah, I've been here for like hour, 2 hours. Nobody's walked into the room yet. Nobody's sat down at the other side of the table. So I'm getting a little worried, like I might have to be alone during this episode. That'd be ridiculous, right? Be weird if that were the case. But again, nobody's coming. Nobody took that hint. Come through the door. Come sit with me at my long wooden rich person table. Record a podcast with me. Welcome, everybody, to session 0.5, a podcast serving as your one-stop shop for all things tabletop role-playing games. My name is Theo and my guest this week is nobody. All right. In all seriousness, no, I'll step out of this. I'll step out of this weird bit that I'm doing. In all seriousness, though, yes, I am doing an episode alone today. For the last 3 episodes, all of which you can find on our YouTube channel, Session 0.5, I've had a guest or two with me. But because this podcast is in the early stages of development, this is only episode 4 at this point, I wanted to try some things out, and I figured this time I'd give a solo episode a shot, just to see how it goes. I'll tell you, it'll be a lot easier to edit. Just one track. I won't have to worry about like delay or anything like that, which is going to be very helpful. And I'm also curious, like the last couple of episodes has been upwards to like an hour long. I want to see if this one will be any shorter or if I'm able to ramble on for an hour. We'll see how it goes. But without any further ado, I and nobody else will move on to the main advice segment for this episode. So in past episodes, I feel as though maybe I could be wrong thinking of my own episodes. Maybe people see it in a different way, but I feel like we give a lot of advice to DMs and GMs. But for this week, I wanted to focus a little bit more on player characters, because in the game, PCs are just as important, if not more so, as DMs. So for today's main advice segment, we're talking about how to be the best PC that you can be. How can you be the best possible player in your group? And I think this is something that at least came up a lot in my mind when I was first playing. I definitely and I think a lot of people, especially if you've seen like actual play shows, it seems like the DM is the driving force, who's really the one keeping the game going. But when you take a closer look, the PCs are just as, if not even more important than the DM. And I shouldn't even say more important. It's a cohesive thing. PCs and DMs are working together to make a game of D&D or really any other game that has the same kind of dynamic of DM running, PC playing. It takes both of those roles to make a game go well. So like when I was first playing, I thought it was the DM who did most of the work. Then as I gained more experience, realized it was just as much on the PC's plate to make a game fun. So a couple of tips that I'm going to give you for today on how to be a great PC. And I think the first and one of the bigger things, we've touched on this a little bit before in previous episodes, but when you're a PC, you need to be able to balance your time in the spotlight. It's super, super important that you aren't hogging it 24/7. But it's also important that you're not always slinking back into a corner and not doing anything. Because there's two extremes, right? There is the extreme on the first thing I mentioned, which is that like a PC hogging the spotlight all the time, they will become the main character. And in a tabletop game, there's not really supposed to be a main character. It's a group thing. And then there's the other extreme, which is the DM feels very awkward and has to handhold you because you are not really stepping up. So tips for both of those kinds of people. If you are someone who is very, very comfortable in the tabletop environment, take a second to bring someone else into the game who's maybe not as comfortable or is maybe a little shyer. You can say you can specifically in character mention their character, be like, hey, Barnabas, what do you think about this? Kind of allowing them to take that initiative when maybe they're not as comfortable initiating it themselves. Or, on the outside, the DM is like, hey, here's the puzzle or problem or enemy or whatever, what y'all doing? You just, instead of maybe your first instinct would be, immediately think of a way to solve it, maybe you could pose the question to somebody else, be like, hey, what do you think we should do? And that's just a couple of great ways to bring someone else into the situation instead of always hogging it. And if you are on the shyer side, obviously it can be hard. Like if you're like me, I've been playing most of my recent games, actually all of my recent games, since, like for like a year. I've been playing all of my recent games over Discord. So, I'm in my bedroom. I'm in my bedroom right now. My dogs are in the other room. My brother is in the other room. I only have one brother. But like, it can be weird when there are other people in your house, to like, try to get in character or be loud. That's something that comes a little bit more naturally to me because I have so much experience in the game. But maybe it doesn't for you. So what I can say is, if you have other friends in your group who are getting into character, who are like getting themselves out there, and really, really playing the game to the best of their ability, regardless of what other people think, try to match that energy, right? Try to see those friends of yours who are who are really putting themselves out there, and don't be afraid to try to emanate them, right? Try to role play just as hard as they are, for lack of a better phrase. Another thing that I could say is, and I know this is kind of dumb advice. This is going to sound dumb, like it's dumb advice. Don't be afraid. It's first of all, it's very unlikely that anyone's going to openly judge you for having fun during D&D. Not everybody is, and this is going to be helpful for those of you who, like myself, are very anxious. Not everyone is an 80s movie school bully who's going to slap your books out of your hand and call you a nerd because you spoke for 2 seconds in a British accent. It's fine. You probably don't have to worry about that. If you're worried about being too loud and you're going to disrupt people, you could try to be quiet, or you could, just give it a shot. Just try your best to really let yourself be your character. Really take that next step into being into role playing and getting in the moment, as opposed to worrying about what's around you. D&D is supposed to be and tabletop role playing games are supposed to be an immersive experience. They're supposed to be another place. When you take those steps out of the place you are physically in to get into the game world, that will start helping you be less anxious about putting yourself out there in terms of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop games. This is super, super important. I have players all the time who, forget the rules every now and again. And that's fine. If you're like, oh, I don't remember entirely what this spell does. It's like, okay, I can just look it up real quick. But there's a difference between that and then just like fully not knowing the rules at all and needing still playing the game for months and being like, which one's the D20? That's a little too much. So it is one of the best ways to be a good PC is devoting some of your outside time to D&D. And for those of you who've never DM'd before, that might sound weird. But that's exactly what I did. I was like an aspiring DM, so that kind of pushed me to learn the rules a little bit more than I had known about before previously. But it's also just super fun to like learn the rules of whatever game you're playing, so that you're a little more familiar with them. And it also is going to help your DMs a lot if you not only know the rules at minimum a basic level, but like even better if you know them like to an advanced degree, like pick up the player's handbook and flip through it a little bit. But it can be even better if you know specific things mechanically about your character. I have players all the time who forget about their abilities and never use them. And it can be kind of annoying. I don't mean to call anybody out because I know my players listen to this podcast and have been on this podcast before. But it's kind of annoying when like you have these cool abilities that you just don't use ever. So one of the ways to just be a good player character and be the best possible player character is knowing that you have those abilities and using them in cool moments, because then that makes the game not only more fun for you, but more fun for everybody, because it makes it seem like a really, really cool experience. And then we touched upon this already a little bit, but don't let the DM do all the cool roleplay, right? Yeah, the DM is gonna maybe do some funny voices for you and and act like a crazy person 1 second and then be a super serious guy in the next second. But don't let them be the one that runs the show, You are a character as well. You're not just Jeffrey, now you're Cornelius Stormmaiden, right? And there's a difference between Jeffrey and Cornelius Stormmaiden. And don't be afraid to bring out that difference. And this also goes with descriptions. I myself, as a DM, and even on the player side, absolutely live writing scene setting and doing dramatic descriptions of things to set the scene and really get players into that world. Don't be afraid to do that on the player side as well. Like in combat or out of combat when you're doing something. If you're making a roll to talk to somebody, to maybe persuade them or deceive them, don't just say, I'm going to roll to persuade. A good DM will be like, okay, what do you say? And knowing what you're going to say ahead of time, instead of just being like, I roll to persuade nat 20. Oh God, now he has to believe me. Try to say something persuasive. Be the character in that moment. Don't just be the player trying to win the game. And then you will find yourself being in a much more immersive experience. I think the final thing we can talk about is probably the most important. All of these are important, and I've said that they are all important as I'm going through them. But this is the most important thing. Help the rest of the group. Don't be out for yourself and only yourself. Make sure that you are constantly and consistently helping the rest of the group as well. If you've got some healing spells and Johnny over there is on 1 HP don't just let Johnny die. There's going to be circumstances in which Johnny may die because maybe he's not doing so. Maybe he's not doing so hot, and there's a lot of enemies around them that you're not going to be able to cut through. But like, if Johnny's out in the open, he's on 1 hit point, he's going to die probably. Go pump Johnny with a cure wounds. You don't need to just leave him there because you want to whack the goblin or take some treasure. As cool as that sounds, you're not the only person there. And I think that's kind of the big ending piece of advice that I can give you. You as a PC are not the only person playing the game. There are other people there too, and you need to worry about them just as much as yourself. Okay. Moving on to our secondary advice segment. All DMs and GMs have different ways that they go about prepping for their games. Today, because I'm alone, I am going to tell you about my plan for prep, and maybe you'll learn some things from that. Maybe you'll never use it again and skip this entire part of the podcast, but I want to try to help all the budding GMs and DMs out there by telling you about my exact prep process. So this is what I do pretty much every time. We'll start with like just a regular session. What am I doing on a campaign that's ongoing and I've already run it a couple times? What do I do each week, or each couple of weeks? I tend to play games on a weekly basis, if possible. Meaning like if my friends are super busy that week, it's no big, we'll just postpone. But like every week, generally, I'm writing a D&D game. And that is a pretty important thing. I don't play modules all that much. I've run a module like maybe once or twice. I don't do it very often. I like to create my own stories and create original stories with the players at my table. So I like to run homebrew stuff. But every week I write a session. Only one session. I am never more than one session ahead. In my mind I might be. In my mind I might be thinking long term. But on paper I am never more than one session ahead. This is important because at any moment the players can do something wild that you didn't expect. You have to be ready to accept those sudden changes and scrap plans. Being a DM isn't all planning. Sometimes it's improvising. And you have to be ready at any moment to scrap a plan you had. So every week for a homebrew campaign, I write a session. I think about whatever happened last time, so I put my players in like wherever they left off, generally, and then I go from there. I think of like, what are some story beats I can hit? What are some things that I want to do this session? I'll plan a cool puzzle, maybe some cool combat. I make it kind of linear, but I also don't make it linear, and that sounds ridiculous, but I have like literally my session prep is a bulleted list, with some bullets underneath those bullets. But some of them is literally like sometimes they'll just write like, and they RP here for like I'll have a character talk to them and then I'll kind of let the flow of the game flow. The PCs talk to this one other person and this one other person talks back, and that's what happens. And I don't have to write the dialogue or like plan out every possible thing that the players could say, and plan a response to it that this NPC is giving. By God, don't do that. You will hate yourself by the end of that, and you will never want to play the game again. So leave some moments for improv too. So like if you create a situation, or your players create a situation, but for our purposes, if you create a situation that your players could take a bunch of different ways, you can try to plan each way, or each way that they could go, or you could say, I'm gonna improvise here, and literally like write that down in your notes. Like I'm gonna improvise based on what they do, because your players might do something that you don't expect. You cannot do like a choose your own adventure book. There is not always a page that you can turn to where the exact thing that your player was going to do is on there and you have a bunch of plans for it. That's not always possible. So you have to be ready at any moment for them to be like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. And you're like, oh, I wasn't ready for that. But I'm going to work with you anyway, and I'm going to use my brain and not my notes to figure this out. And you got to do a little improvising. So that's how I plan for a session. I do like a whole thing. I don't usually take notes during a session, but I'm going to start that. I ordered a notebook, DM notebook from the Rook and the Raven, which is a website that does like custom notebooks and stuff that I plan to start like writing stuff down during sessions. I don't always write stuff down during sessions, but I want to start doing that. It can be good just for like continuity's sake, so you don't forget certain things like names of characters, voices that you did, names of places that you came up with on the spot, just to write them down, so you aren't planning a session the next time and you're like, oh, what was his name again? So I think one thing I haven't touched on yet is, I've talked about planning for ongoing campaigns. How do you plan for like a one shot or a first session? So starting with a brand new campaign, do a session 0. It is going to be very helpful for you, as well as your players. I never let players make a character like that they came up with the idea for when I wasn't there, and then like not show it to me and then suddenly have this character. And I suggest you don't either, because then you'll end up with some wild stuff that you weren't prepared for. What you should do is hold like a session 0, either hold a session 0 / character creation and planning session, where you're like, hey, here's the world I want to do. Now let's pitch some character ideas. Or you can do like, here's the world for this session 0. I'm telling you everything that you need to know about the world. We'll come back next week and brew some character ideas in your head and then come back to me. And then you'll have like an accurate idea of who's in your game, what kind of characters you're dealing with. Your characters will hopefully be like adjacent to your setting, whereas if people hadn't showed you their characters beforehand, you wouldn't be in that situation. So after you do a session 0, then it's time to prep session 1. Here's where you want to use the characters that your players came up with, and like hopefully they've come up with a cool backstory. Encourage that, by the way, because you'll be able to use their arcs that they like, some backstory stuff that they already planned, and then like places that they'd like their character to go, you can use in your game. You can make them each, like, you can give them each their own arc if you'd like. I do that all the time. You can give them each their own cool villain. That's where you want to start using that stuff. Maybe session 1, you start a little arc where you're not focusing on a specific character and you're just doing like an introductory thing. But what I always like to start by doing is a big, like, we'll call it like a meaty paragraph of scene setting, where it's like you're describing what the world looks like, to really, like, this is session 1 is like the first big moment of your game. You want to set the tone and the scene in a way that your players know what they're expecting, like the vibes to be like for most of the game. And then once you do that, that's when you want to start like planning either how your characters all meet. Maybe they've already met before. What I like to do for how characters meet is I like them to not have met before. I like to spend session 1 focusing on each different character, giving them their own little chance in the spotlight, and then creating some event that causes them to all come together. This is not like the traditional way for some is to just start in one location and everybody's there already, and it's super easy. I like to take the hard road with my way. You absolutely don't have to do that if you don't want to. If you just want to be like you're on the road in a wagon and you're traveling, that's totally cool. But if you want to take the hard road and be like, and start with each character and try to either improv your way, or probably honestly improv your way into all the characters meeting each other, that's also a totally fine way to go about it. I will say a downside of my way of prep, I never know how long my sessions are going to be. I hope that they're like, I tend to run like 2 to 3 hour games. I used to run longer ones, but I can't handle 2 to 3 hour. I can't handle more than 2 to 3 hours over the interwebs. It's also hard to plan more than 2 to 3 hours for me. But you know, some people can plan like 5-hour sessions. They're wizards to me. But yeah, I never really know how long it's going to be. I have like a vague idea, but that'll come with time. You might have a specific way that you go about it if you decide to mirror this way, or you know, you come up with your own way that you'll be able to start figuring out how much time you got. Let's move on to the news. We got some pretty spicy news this week, starting with a super cool one that I know my brother is going to find interesting if he listens to this episode. I don't know if he listens to these. I hope he does. Will, if you're listening, hi. Anyway, Nightfall Games is developing a tabletop role-playing game system for the Terminator films, which I think is super cool. The Terminator movies are some of my brother's favorites. They're super fun and cool to watch, so I can imagine that it would be cool to play through. So looking down, there's this whole interview on nworld.org that they did with the developer. I'm not going to read all of it because that would take a long time. But if you want to find out more information about the game, you can go there, or you can just Google the Terminator RPG. And also, if you're interested, the Kickstarter for the game is launching on March 11th, 2021. Oh, so it's actually already launched. You can go support their Kickstarter, which has already launched, from Nightfall Games, the Terminator RPG. And that sounds super, super fun. Next piece of news, this new D&D show that I actually forgot about. It's a couple months old, I think, at this point. I think all like 6 or so episodes are out by this point, but it's called Stuff of Legends. Stuff of Legends. It is a actual play Dungeons and Dragons show, mashed up with puppets. They use puppets to play their characters, which is pretty cool. And it is called Stuff of Legends. I already said that. If you want to check it out, it is on the Jovenshire YouTube channel. The cast, I can read you the cast. You have Joshua Ovenshire as the Dungeon Master, Lisa Foyles, I believe, Laser Corn, Shanna Malcolm, and Brandon Rogers. Excuse me. So if you like Dungeons and Dragons, which you probably do if you're listening to this, or at least you like tabletop games and you like puppets, check out the Stuff of Legends. And this next piece of news is what I'm real excited about. Real excited about. Because my personal favorite actual show, Dimension 20, is coming out with a brand new season on April 7th, which as of recording this is April 3rd. So in just a few days, a new Dimension 20 season is coming out. The way Dimension 20 splits up its seasons is between what they call main quests and side quests. The main quests are like the big major seasons. They're upwards of like 17, 18 episodes long. And then there are side quests, which are like 6 or 7 episodes long. This next season is a side quest So it's a shorter season, and it is called Mice and Murder. And from what I can tell, it's like the classic Clue style murder at a dinner party. Everyone there's a suspect situation, and all the characters play as humanoid animals, which is pretty cool. Dimension 20 has been doing mostly has been doing pretty much all virtual stuff for like safety reasons with the COVID. But this is the first season where they're kind of trying to get a little bit more of what earlier Dimension 20 was. Earlier Dimension 20 was literally just all the cast sitting around a table. They were famous for these large, extravagant miniature sets, which look super cool, and I think they're bringing those back because that's what they've been missing. Like the last 2 seasons, there was a side quest that they did, all Theater of the Mind with no sets, and then they did one where they partnered with Roll20 to make some cool virtual tabletops. Now they are kind of bringing virtual play and in-person play together, and they're actually having, I think, Brennan, the Dungeon Master, is going to be on the set that they filmed the earlier seasons at. He's going to be manipulating like the big, extravagant miniature sets, and all the players will be recording virtually. So that's pretty cool that they're bringing the big sets back. I'm definitely excited, and I hope that you are too. And without further ado, it is time to take a quick break. I and nobody else will be right back. And we are back. Well, not we, just me. I'm still alone. Hi. I left for a little bit, and then I sat back down at the overly large table, and nobody came in. So it's still just me. But that's fine. I'm not butthurt about it. It's time for shilling. Woo! So please, if you're listening to this on YouTube right now, which you probably will, hello. Scroll down a little bit and you should see a couple of cool buttons that you can click. I love buttons, dude. There's one that says subscribe, and if you're cool, you'll click that button, because that button is serving as your official cool pass. Click that little subscribe button and you will officially be considered cool. There's also a little button that's a thumbs up. There's another little button that's a thumbs down. Don't click that one, because that one means you're less cool. But if you want to be even more cool, you'll click that little thumbs up button, right? Which is a long-winded way of saying like and subscribe to our channel, because we are going to be posting most of the future episodes on YouTube, as I have said before. Actually, all the future episodes on YouTube. You can also scroll down and comment. Oh, there's a comments section down there. What? Tickety-tack type some cool little things in there. You can tell us all sorts of things like, wow, this episode was great, or wow, this episode sucked. Either of those are acceptable, and I will read both of them. You can also send us your questions and stories and whatnot. You can do that through, like I just mentioned, the comments section in the YouTube, or you can send us an email if you'd like. Our email is session0.5pod@gmail.com. That's SESSION 0.5pod@gmail.com. You can also tweet at us on Twitter and follow us on Twitter at Session05pod on Twitter. That's SESSION number 05pod on Twitter. We really would love to read your questions. And honestly, if you want this podcast to keep having cool content, we need some questions, guys. So please send them in. We will answer them. Nearly guaranteed. Pretty much fully guaranteed. And if you have stories, even if you want to send us if you want to say, Theo, you suck, to put it in the email. I don't care. I have a heart of steel. You can't break it. Send it over the email, send it to the Twitter, put it in the YouTube comments, whatever you need to say, put it there. We might just read it on the podcast. Moving on from shill time, it's time for everybody's favorite segment. This is the only reason anybody listens to this goddamn show. It's time for the unremarkable presidential fact. We talk a lot about imaginary things on this show, but imaginary things pale in comparison to cold, hard, historical fact. Now, last week I got a complaint from my friend Jacob, who has sent in questions before and is a friend of the podcast, that Lyndon B. Johnson's dick, the facts about the man himself, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Jumbo, were much too remarkable to be considered unremarkable. So this week we have a fact that's especially unremarkable, just for you, Jacob, about Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman was, let me look this up so I don't get this wrong, was the 33rd U.S. president, and his middle name is S. It doesn't stand for anything. Not an initial. His middle name is S. Harry S. Truman is his full name. This is because, according to a source I found, www.trumanlittlewhitehouse.com, his parents gave him the middle initial S to honor and please his grandfathers, Anderson Shipp Truman and Solomon Young. That is why this man's has no middle name, but also kind of a middle name, because it is just S, which is pretty wild. All right, moving on. Somebody made, I found this on Twitter, somebody made, if you've seen the recent Lil Nas X video, somebody made a Montero homebrew monster. It's a medium fiend, chaotic neutral. It's a challenge rating 13. So it's honestly pretty well made from what I'm looking at right now. This was posted by Iffy Nwadue on Twitter, who's pretty, he's in the actual play scene. And it was posted on r/D&D on Reddit by u/existentialocto. So go check that out. That's pretty cool. I just found that the other day and wanted to talk about it on the podcast. And I think we're only like 40-ish minutes in at this point, but I think it's time to finish it off with one of my personal favorite tabletop stories from one of my personal games that I don't believe we've talked about on the podcast before. This is the story of how Satan himself was defeated with nothing more than a cup of coffee. This story actually stars a couple of people who've been on the podcast before, which you might recognize as I'm reading these names. From our list of characters, we had Jared as George W. Bush. And before I go on, I guess I should say the whole point of this, this was a birthday one-shot that I did, where I decided, my friends agreed that we would do a evil game where we all played evil characters. And the premise that I had come up with was infamous historical figures attempting to escape from hell. So we had Jared as George W. Bush, and yes, of course, George W. Bush is not dead yet, but he wanted to play George Bush, so we just headcanoned it that he died choking on a crouton at Panera Bread. What a way to go. He was a aberrant mind sorcerer, which at the time was Unearthed Arcana. We have my friend Steve, who has not been on the podcast, as Michael Jackson, a sorcerer / bard. We had Ethan, who has been on the podcast, first episode. Jared was on the second, I believe. We had Ethan as Robespierre, who was a blood hunter. My brother Will as Lee Harvey Oswald, playing a gunslinger. We had Jacob, who I mentioned earlier, hasn't been on an episode yet, but has been mentioned several times. He played Gandhi as a Way of Mercy monk. And we had Kyle, who has been on the podcast, who was Pope Benedict, which, if you're unfamiliar, was like one of the Hitler Youth guys, who was playing a light cleric, I believe. So basically, I had them go through a bunch of different random things. They had to do a small heist to get their items and magical powers back, which were being kept in a giant vault in hell that was like organized like a museum, where every person who was in hell had their own like artifacts and own segment of the museum. They had to figure out a way, with the help of another demon who was working with them, to heist all of their items back to do some thievery, and so that they could move on with all their powers and their weaponry. And once they had done that, they had to go through a bunch of different puzzles. There was one puzzle, the first like introductory puzzle, they had to like figure out that they needed to like give their blood to enter into another room, where they had to play a sick beat by pressing some stone bricks that made music. They had a battle with one half of the 7 deadly sins. The way I did it was like the offices of the 7 deadly sins. Sloth was sitting there. He wasn't fighting betwixt 2 doors, which were like, I think it was, I don't remember exactly. I'm going to look up the 7 deadly sins and then I'll be able to tell you. So it was like, I grouped it up as, I think it was like greed, gluttony, and pride, with wrath, lust, and envy, I believe. But I didn't tell them that. I just gave them a couple of symbols that they would have to guess which of the sins were in which room based on the symbols. So they, looking at those symbols, had to decide. They went with the one with like, it was greed, gluttony, and pride, because they figured that would be the easier fight. It was not, because I reskinned all of the sins as different monsters, and I made greed a vampire, which was technically the most powerful enemy that was within each of those rooms. So I did a little trolling, basically. I did a little swindling. They were successful in defeating I think I actually forgot a character too, now that I'm thinking about it. My friend Matt was also there. He was playing Genghis Khan, because there were 7 of them. So they were 7 10th level characters. Was pretty powerful. They were able to defeat the 3 enemies pretty easily. Greed was a little tough for them. Then I think they went through one more puzzle before getting to the office of Satan himself. And this is where the story gets a little wild, because they saw, I gave them like a door. It was just a door that was like the office of Satan, CEO of hell. And Jared, seeing an office door, was like, oh, what if I knock and pretend to be delivering him coffee? And they decided that first they were going to need to make coffee. One of them had an alchemist kit. They asked me if they could make coffee using it. I was like, sure, whatever. They made coffee, and they decided to poison the coffee with like a small amount of poison. And they sent Jared in, also known as George Bush. So they sent George Bush in with a cup of coffee. Satan let him in. And what's important to know at this point is that the character Jared was playing was a charisma-based build because he was a sorcerer. So he had a super, super high deception score. So, he went in. He was like, "Oh, I got your coffee." And Satan was like, "Oh, thank God, I've been waiting for this." And he took the coffee. What I didn't tell them was that Satan was immune to poison. So Satan drank it and realized that there was poison in it. And I thought, I'm on the other side of the DM screen, oh, the jig is up. They're going to have to fight Satan now. But Jared, big brain, was like, "Oh, the person who gave me this coffee from the hell coffee shop done messed it up. They're trying to get you, Satan." And I was like, "Roll a deception check." And of course, he rolled super high. So he fully tricked Satan. Got Satan to turn against the coffee guy. So Satan flew out of his office, and they, giving them enough time to all get into his office. And this is where Ethan had a very big brain moment, where at the beginning of the game, for a little thing, I made it so that there was a button in Satan's office that lowered a TV, like a large screen, from the quote unquote ceiling of hell. It's not it's not really a ceiling, just kind of some rocks, where he gave an announcement, or he gave quote unquote morningly announcements to everybody. So Ethan walks in and is like, "Is there a button that lowers down that TV?" And I was like, "There absolutely is." So he lowered down that TV, made an announcement that they were basically doing a coup d'etat, and got everyone in hell to turn against and take down Satan. And it ended with them not escaping hell, because you can't really get out of hell in this world anyway, but becoming the new rulers of hell and having Satan as their maid. And that was maybe one of the wildest moments that I've ever experienced in any tabletop game on the DM or the player's side. But that aside, that is where we're going to end this episode of Session 0.5. Thank you so much for listening. I'll remind you once again to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you like and comment and do all that fun stuff. Thanks so much for listening, and have a good rest of your day/night. See you, everybody.